It is with great pleasure that we introduce you to another presentation from the Literacy Bug. In this case, another activities presentation. In this case, we'll be looking at word sorts, or the activity that can progressively introduce learners to these subtleties in English orthography by gradually introducing children to sound and letter patterns within the context of simple to more complex words. So, as with our previous presentation, Analyzing Spoken Words, they'll be available for download a cheat sheet of all the various aspects in the activity. And you'll find the ability to download this either if you're watching this on YouTube in the description below, or if you're watching this on the Literacy Bug in the blog entry to which this video is attached. And there'll be other downloads that you'll notice as we move through. So basically, word sorts is an activity that's designed to help learners become increasingly confident with the spelling patterns of English. And by taking learners from simple to more complex structures, this approach helps learners make logical sense of word reading and writing in English. And it's also able to be very consistent with the progressive phonics study pattern. In this case, looking at those patterns within the context of blending and segmenting them in words. So without further ado, let me jump into it. Now the focus of word sorts, and I'll show you the logic of word sorts in a second, but the focus of word sorts is on decodable words. And that is, we're introducing children to predictable patterns within English. And by being predictable, you're saying, okay, I can decode this. I might not know the word, or I might not have encountered the word before, but I can decode it. Now, in many cases, the children will be familiar or aware of the word that they're examining, but it also helps them look at the pattern and know that they can pronounce similar words based on that pattern. So it's looking at how they grasp decodable words. That's not to say that learners in their early stages are equally exploring high-frequency words, otherwise sometimes called sight words, but I think that's a misnomer because high-frequency words are still decodable. We still decode them. We don't merely recognize them by sight, but they're so frequent in our environment or in text that we want children to be automatically recognizing those words early on in their exploration, as well as being able to recognize familiar content words, being able to analyze rich words that are part of their oral language vocabulary, and knowing that these rich words and how to spell them, and how to see them, etc. Because a child, even in the younger ages, will need a combination of all these words to write basic texts and read readers. But what we want to make sure that children are doing is not just memorizing how a word looks, but being able to know that there's a logic to how words function in English, even if that logic is maybe a little bit more complex than in more transparent languages like Finnish or Spanish. Now, a few beginning notes that are important. Word sorts is a decoding activity and an encoding one, but I make the emphasis on decoding because our previous presentation, Analyzing Spoken Words, predominantly focused upon how that activity could help children encode or spell the rich oral language that they were familiar with. A logic of how do I problem solve, and using both invented spelling but progressively becoming more confident with conventional spelling to encode the rich vocabulary that I know. Whereas in this case, children will be understanding the patterns of what they see, getting more and more competent in being able to decode, transfer what they're seeing into what they can say. So by progressively exploring such predictable patterns, learners are able to apply logical criteria as they decode words. And it is systematic. Teachers can sequence the sorting activities in such a manner that the learner progressively learns to decode predictable words as well as contend with exceptions. And also, learners should also learn to quickly recognize, as I said on the previous slide, high-frequency words and content words. So it's a combination of the factors. So let's look at the workflow. It's very basic, as I show you, a lot more basic than the Analyzing Spoken Words workflow from the previous presentation. Well, basically, we'll have scattered pictures or word cards. Just scattered. And the task of the learner is to organize those words into categories. So in this case, we'll have the at category as opposed to the app category. And one thing that's quite important about word sorts is there's this out of sorts category, which is a category of exceptions to the rule. Now I've just plumped was in there, but you can see the logic of it is I, as a teacher, might give a child a heading or a sample word, and they have to look through the words and categorize them accordingly. Or another way of approaching it is to don't give the headings, children examine the words, they recognize the patterns in what they're seeing, and then they sort them and they identify the category, the logic of how they've sorted those words. And one thing that's important about the blank tiles is we want learners to add to the pattern. So here it could be bat or nap. And so generalizing beyond what was given and extending to other words that the child knows that would exhibit that pattern. And then we'd go back and read each one. Mat, hat, cat, sap, lap, tap. Now this is very basic, and this is in that early stage of literacy, but there are more complex words that you'd have to sort. And let's say on one side I have a range of words, all with the long A sound, and sometimes it's represented with this A and the silent E at the end, sometimes it's represented with AI, sometimes it's represented with AY, sometimes it's represented with EY. And so learners have to sort those words according to the various ways that the long A sound is represented. And then they'd have to have a conversation of what do I need to remember? What rules am I seeing that might allow me to predict why one choice is used over the other? And at what points do I just have to say, I've just got to know the difference. And I've just got to know that one word is spelled one way, whereas another is spelled the other way. So the sorting activity also allows for the opportunity of dialogue, particularly in the later stages. Now that's the core activity. This is the extension. What I don't want to have happen is that it just becomes a rote task in which the child doesn't attach any meaning to the words that they've just sorted. So this is just a basic one in which I could choose a selection of the words, and I say, well, what's the meaning of hat? What's the meaning of cat, mat, map, and sap? And this is a basic activity, but just making the point that if you just did the sort, the child might risk just seeing those letters as representing of sounds, not actually a vehicle towards representing meaning. And then, in this case, putting those words that are explored into a sentence. This is a silly sentence, but it's good for illustration purposes. The fat cat in the hat sat on the mat, on a map, covered in sap, etc. So as you can tell, word sorts, basic workflow, nothing too demanding or exciting there. So let me demonstrate this here. Okay, so pardon me whilst I move this over to the side. Here I'll have two categories. Now I'll start off demonstrating what they call a closed sort. Now a closed sort is when I give the learners the categories. Now this is going to be consonant vowel consonant with the short U sound. Now to be honest, I probably wouldn't do this for young learners. I wouldn't give them those categories. Those are for me, the teacher. What I could give the learners is an example word. Pet, and emphasize for the learner. Okay, so we've got this word pet. P-e-t. Oh, it's a e sound as opposed to s-n, s-an. So the letter U makes that sound. And then I've got some words here, so I won't spend a long time doing this, but okay, I've got duck, duck, t, and et. And if I don't, I've got a whole lot of other words there, but I'll just continue to show for demonstration case. So if I have this focusing on the sound, I might go, what other word has the sound in it in a short word? And I go, oh, maybe the word fun, fun. And so, providing my own, what's another word? Well, let's say set. And so that's it as far as a demonstration. And I won't go into the extension where I'd attach meaning to these words and write them in a sentence, because I think that's self-explanatory. But the other activity that I do at the end of this is have the learner rehearse each of the words in a sequence. It's just to emphasize the sounds and the patterns I'm noticing. So sun, sun, duck, g, gum, et, 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 and t, and t, and. And so that's basically what a word sort is. And I'll show you lots of resources that demonstrate that this does become much more complex over time. So this is an example of an activity that supports learners to develop skills. We've talked about phonological awareness in other presentations. In this case, we're focusing on decoding and spelling skills. And there's a range of skills that we develop in learners: their vocabulary, their grammar, their fluency, etc. So sometimes we're talking with learners, sometimes we're reading to, with, and helping learners read on their own, writing, etc. But in this skills, particularly on focusing to develop some really core skills to help learners become more and more automatic with their writing and their reading. Because the more automatic you become and the more fluent and accurate you become with your writing and reading, the more time you can spend upon more complex comprehension and composition. And so the key premise for the activity is, for a beginning reader, every word is a unique pattern. So they're having to memorize every word and go, I need to store that word in my memory and how it's said. But as you read more and more and more, and you explore words more and more and more, major statistical patterns emerge as the child encounters a larger sample of words, and later finer-grained dependencies. So readers become orthographic experts by studying, by absorbing lots of data, by practice, and more, so that there's a logic to how words are put together. And so I'm not remembering each word as a unique pattern, I'm remembering each word as composed of parts that I know. And I can see what's the way to pronounce those parts that I know based upon my examination of words. Now there's some key developmental stages in spelling. Now you'll see later on that I take many of these rules of thumb from a resource called Words Their Way. But what I've also found through my study is that these stages that I'm about to show you are also consistent with other both reading and spelling progressions. Okay. So one phase is called the emergent phase, and it's from 3 to 5 years old. Now in that preschool stage, there's a few things that we want learners to be able to develop. Because not reading at that stage, but we want them to become aware of a number of things, such as the alphabet, that they're conscious that there is an alphabet and what letters are meant to represent, and also what things like icons are supposed to represent, and have an understanding of this concept of representation, and both not only knowing letters, but those letter sounds. And if I jump down here, also having a concept of what a word is, being able to see the word stop and a stop sign and know that that bounded thing is a word, and that in it are letters, and that we combine words to form sentences. Same with looking at their name and knowing that their name is a word. And some words have multiple syllables to it. So rather than all words having one syllable and then thinking that if I hear 2 syllables, I must track and see multiple words. No, I have an understanding of what a word is. And that I also am developing my phonemic awareness, that my ability to hear spoken words and break those words into syllables, but also breaking syllables or single syllable words into individual sounds, such as cat, it becomes k-at. So that's the emergent phase. And we'll see later on that there's a technique called picture sorts before we introduce reading real words, in which children sort pictures by sound. And in that, for the decodable stage, from 4 to 7 years old, we want learners to master what we call the CVC style of words: consonant, vowel, consonant. And the reason we want them to master those words is predominantly, in the vast majority of cases, in the CVC, the vowel makes its short sound. Because in English, what's complex is vowels can make a range of sounds. So a letter like P makes the P sound a significant amount of times, and that can become more complex with combinations like PH making the F sound. But vowels are a little bit less regular. If I see that letter, let's say the letter A, can make 4 or more sounds: a, etc. And so when we look at that, it's like, okay, so this is a stable pattern in which the vowel for A makes that A sound, the letter vowel E makes the E sound, the letter U makes the sound, letter I makes the I sound, letter O makes the O sound, and that can be pretty reliable. And so we introduce your simple consonant vowel consonant, such as cat and bed and pig. We'll explore that in a second. Digraphs, which is your CHs, your SH, your THs, so with, chat, ship. And then you introduce blends, because that consonant can be a blend, like PLAN, plan, or fresh, FR, So it's not just simply your cat. You have longer words, but it's that logic of this vowel is bound on both sides in the single syllable word by consonants. And then once that's stable, you introduce the silent E pattern and say, well, what if we add an E at the end? It will impact that vowel, and suddenly that vowel will make its second sound, or its long sound, or it's when the vowel says its name. So mat becomes mate, mate, and then further on, then you go into the more complex vowels, in which you have the EA, the EE, the AI, and where there's more decision making. But that's still within single syllable words. And so from grades 2 to 3, mastering. When we say master, it's like, without a doubt, I can read words of that pattern. And then further on from there, grades 3, 4, etc., learning how to add inflectional endings, when to double the consonant, when to drop the consonant, being able to read and write multiple syllabic words, unfamiliar words with confidence, etc. And then when you get to the older stages, you're no longer focusing on spelling or decoding for the sake of spelling. The exploration of words is where vocabulary building merges with the understanding of word structure. So you're looking at prefixes and suffixes and Greek and Latin roots, and being able to problem solve words by understanding its morphology, etc. And so that's that progression, and in that progression, being able to identify the most common syllable patterns within English, and making appropriate choices therein. So in other words, over time, we learn quite a bit. Your CVC patterns, your PIN, and as I said before, adding the silent E, and then exploring your more complex vowel patterns, and then multisyllabic words. And similar here, giving more examples. So you can download these slides. I won't go through everything in detail here, but you can look at how the words become more complex across the stages. But what I want to demonstrate in the next slide is that this progression is also consistent with a phonics progression. So the words that you choose to do word studies of can be composed of only the letter and sounds that the learners are developing at that particular time. So maybe the word sorts all have MTS, and then eventually there's a contrast of the short A words with the short I words, etc. So it can be very consistent with other developmental sequences. Okay, so let me demonstrate, and this is more demonstrating some resources that will be available for download in each of those progressions. Okay, so that emergent phase, so 3 to 5 years old. And one thing before I show anything, it's a crux to that early stage, is phonemic awareness. So before we talk about techniques like picture sorts, etc., one thing a child has to have a grasp of to engage in any of these activities is the concept that words can be broken up into individual sounds, and that those individual sounds can be matched to letters or letter combinations, and that if we just vary one letter within a word, it will change the whole word and into a different meaning. And so that fine-tuned manipulation of what I hear is important. So let me do just a basic example. So learners will need to be able to say, oh, I know that word, it's a pig, and it has 3 sounds to it. P, I, G. So really basic, nothing too exciting. But I have to go, okay, now that I know how it has P, I, G, I have some placeholders, because I'm learning my letter and sound combination. So P, that's made by the P sound. I, made by the letter I. G. And then if I'm still just focusing on sound, P, I, G. What if I change the first letter to B? B, I, G. Big, and so on. So the point I want to make is, before we look at word sorts or picture sorts, that concept that children have that we just change one thing in a word and suddenly it means something else. But I'm starting to develop that there may be a couple words that are very similar and might differ in only one feature, and so I'm not trying to remember each individual word. I'm going, oh, what's the difference between pig and big? Ig remains the same. It's those first initial letters, and I'm starting to see chunk the patterns that I notice within the words that I'm encountering. So I don't want to go into that too much, because I've covered phonemic awareness in other videos in more detail. But in the emergent phase, one activity is not a word sort at all, but a picture sort. So let's say I'm introducing children to the letters B, or B, C, and D, and I'm telling the learners the stability of those letters will be B makes the B sound, C makes the K sound, and D makes the D sound. And I'll say, okay, so what do we have here? A box. Where should we put that? B, box. Let's have another couple pictures. Oh, what's that? It's a book. And so on. Those are dice. That's a bed. Bed. And that's a coat. And you'll see over here I'll come up with this range and lots of pictures, and you sort them by beginning sound, and you can start to isolate and teach that letter B by the words that the child already knows. And so that's something that's explored in that emergent stage. And as I've said before, this could be done as a closed sort, in which I give the children the categories. But you could also give a fewer selection of words, and the children have to say all those words, and then they have to problem solve. Okay, these are all starting with the B sound, so we'll put them over here. These are all starting with the K sound, so we'll put them all over here. In that problem solving activity of, I don't know what the categories are yet, but as we say those words out loud, as we explore those words out loud, we can start to predict what those patterns or those categories would be. So that makes it less of a rote task and more to a problem-solving sort of task. And this task can also become more complex because rather than just a single letter, you can do a blend. Have all words that have the cl, bull, and pull, pl, and children have to sort the pictures based upon consonant blends. So I'll show that in a second. So here are some resources. Now these resources I won't put online because I've taken them from another sort of set of activities. But this is called a soundboard, in which we can sort of organize words based around letters. But the next page is where you see how I can organize it also by digraphs, the C, ch, sh, th, woof. But also blends, bull, burr, cl, cur, and you cut those out and you do an exploration. So that's in that emergent phase. You can do a range of sorting activities so that certain letter sound combinations become distinct, and one can explore the differences between both similar sounds and have a comprehensive understanding of sounds and words without having to read whole words or read full real words. Okay. So Letter-Name-Alphabetic is your CVC, your consonant vowel stage, as we said before. So these will be available online. And basically I've just got a range of sorts, quite a number of sorts, starting with just focusing on the short A sound. Then it will focus on the short I sound, etc. Introducing the short O sound, etc. Introducing the short E sound, the short U sound, and then doing discrimination. What's the difference? Discriminating the short A sound from the short I sound from the short U sound, so that children are learning the subtle distinctions between those vowel sounds, because consonant sounds may be clearly distinct to a learner, but they need to hear and detect those subtleties between vowel sounds. So a, I, e, etc. And that's the major focus for the Letter-Name-Alphabetic, is to start to distinguish those vowel sounds, and so on, in increasingly more complex and less familiar words. And that's it. There's a couple more, but that you've got the concept. So the resources that will be available online will be those, but we also have word lists in accordance with those. So let's say if anybody uses the cover say, spelling something 3 times as subsequently to a word study, that resource is available as well. Oops. I'll just put those off to the side. Okay, so then the next stage is introducing that silent E pattern, and there's more complex vowel patterns. Again, that's in the within word pattern stage, and these will be available online as well. So this is an activity that contrasts the short A, which the children have mastered in the previous word sorts, and introducing the long A. So hat and name isn't nam, because the silent E introduces something different. And so children go, okay, so which words have the A sound in them, which words have the A sound in them, etc. And in this sort, it's like, here are all different ways of spelling the long A. Let's sort them and know, well, that's hey, that's they, and so I have to remember and know the differences in meaning in those various spellings of the long A pattern. Same with the long E, and so on. So this resource goes through those those complex vowel patterns, new, blue, thumb, true, okay, so where does that go, etc. That a truth actually would probably go into out of sorts, because truth should be a consonant vowel consonant where the U makes the sound as in thumb, but it makes the oo sound. So I'd put that in out of sorts, whereas brush, the, thumb, bruh, bruh, that brush would go underneath. And so you can see what the child has to do. They might throw truth from a visual recognition underneath thumb, or the short U, and you go, actually, no, it might look like that, but that's not how we say it, and so on. So that's why word sorts are good, because they're not just merely you've got to remember that word. You actually have to have a discussion about why is that the case, and why is that an exception, and be comfortable with those things. So it's very much a constructionist approach to that explicit exploration of decoding. And as I mentioned before, you've got that's represented in lists as well. And then the next page, this is where we get into multisyllabic words and adding and functional endings. And basically, there's a huge transition up into the end of within word patterns, where children are still learning to read, whereas at this stage we expect children to be able to have enough knowledge to be able to read. But suffixes and affixes, children have to explore really more complex words in their in spelling, and these activities are as much designed to develop vocabulary as they are to develop just decoding skills. So, just shorting. So, and also you get into things like when do you double the consonant? When do you not double the consonant? So sorting rules based on some of the rules we need to words based on the rules that we need to follow, and more complex sort of spelling activity, sorting between present and past, and so on. And I'll point you to a further resource in Words Their Way that will talk about other more complex activities that you can supplement with word sorts at this age group. And last but not least, and I should there, spelling lists as well. Last but not least, you have the derivational stage. And when I pull up the derivational stage, this is 11 years and older. This is truly where it's as much a study of vocabulary as it is spelling. And so the first sort, looking at the prefix in, un, dis, and mis, all having that not meaning. So uneasy, not easy, insincere, not sincere, dishonest, not honest, misspell, not spelled correctly. And so we're exploring, okay, which words use un as opposed to in, etc., and discriminating just the conventional uses of those patterns, and so on. So really looking at more complex aspects of English morphology and spelling to build more advanced academic vocabulary. So word sorts don't have to be merely something basic for younger learners. It's something that can be introduced throughout the curriculum. And so in other words, that demo predominantly also introduced you to the resources that are available. Now, the PDF for both this presentation as well as what I've just shown you in a similar theme will be either in the description below if you're watching this on YouTube, or on the Literacy Bug if you're watching this on Literacy Bug website or blog. So in short, let's go look at it. So we want children to be able to recognize those decodable words that we're exploring now, as well as their high-frequency words that they're exploring with their teachers, as well as really lovely content vocabulary that they're developing as well, so that they can grow as a writer and they can grow as a reader. And in terms of spelling development, we talked last presentation about the stage in which children spell it like it sounds. They're sounding it out in their head, and they're applying their phonemic awareness and their early understanding of letter-sound correspondences for invented spellings, and it's lovely and it's rich and it's great. But they have to transition to this stage in which they're spelling it by visual pattern. So they see it and go, I can see, I know that pattern. I know that pattern in other words that I've seen, etc. And then they're also exploring rules, because that's the other thing that you'll be exploring in word studies. It's like, well, some of these words, the C makes the k sound, and in some of the words it makes the s sound. And I noticed that it makes the s sound whenever it's in front of the vowel I or the vowel E, but it makes the k sound if it's before the letter A or O. And so, is that a rule? Is that something that I need to remember? And then subsequent to that, all that study and all exploration of words is they just spell it from knowledge. You explore, you study enough, though you're not necessarily analyzing every time you see a word. You're retrieving from memory. You're retrieving from long-term memory, but you can't skip that step. You have to go through those development steps to really store in long-term memory the words that you'll need to rely upon in the future. So for a mature reader, when they encounter an unfamiliar word, they're applying all those skills that you would develop through word sorts. They're sounding it out based upon the rules that they've experienced, and to get to the correct pronunciation. However, for words that are familiar, it's quick automatic recognition. They're not putting any thought, they're not sounding it out, they're recognizing that word. They may be sounding it out subconsciously, or so rapidly they're not aware of it, but not in a manner if it's an unfamiliar word that they have to stop and deconstruct. So a few practical reminders. Equipment, not much equipment. I've given you the many of the equipment necessary. Your word sort sheets. For your extension, having your colored tokens to highlight different meanings, be able to write the sentences, but not lots of equipment. As I said before, there's two approaches: closed sorts, in which you give them the categories; open sorts, in which children have to derive the categories or categorize the words based on the patterns that they're seeing. And one thing that we focused on heavily in this presentation is pattern sorts, is sorting words based on patterns. But we shouldn't disregard a really important other way of using sorts, and that's concept sorts. And that is, I'm organizing whether pictures or words into conceptual categories. So the example I put here is animate and inanimate. So it's not a decoding or spelling activity, it's exploring meaning. I've got a range of words. I'm just learning this concept of animate and versus inanimate, or warm-blooded as opposed to cold-blooded, and I have to look at a series of things and sort them to reinforce my understanding of that concept. So that's a brilliant way of using sorts as well, and highly encouraged. Steps, I'll fly through these quickly as well. Cut out the word sorts. If you're performing a closed sort, give them the categories. If you're performing an open sort, give them blank cards to write the categories on after they've sorted the words. After the words have been sorted, consider words that don't fit the pattern. Put these in the out of sorts category. Also write words on blank word cards that also fit the pattern. So it shows I understand this pattern enough that I can give you other examples. Once words are reviewed, say them out loud. Say each column out loud. Choose a few words and perform a semantic map or explore their meaning, and then write really rich, juicy sentences from those words, and then reflect upon those patterns once they're covered. And the key thing is also integrate it into practice. Word sort shouldn't be done on their own. It should be part of a rich literacy cycle, and I'll show you one on the next page. Or they could be incorporated into interactive writing. So after a word sort, class is writing this group text. The teacher pauses and goes, "Oh, forgot. I know what word goes here, and I can say it, but I don't know how it's spelled. Can someone come up with and write it on the board for me and hand over that pen?" And allows them to apply the word, the knowledge that they've just gained, and integrating it and consolidating in meaningful practice. So if we don't integrate it, it just becomes a rote activity, and the child doesn't see that connection between what I'm studying with what I'm being asked to do later on, which is to read and to write. So another integrated activity is to do a word hunt. After doing a particular pattern, let's say exploring a picture book that they've just read, and say, let's go through this picture book and see if we can find that pattern in any of the words in that book. And then after doing that word hunt, revisit the book and read it together in a rich manner, which again would allow them to practice those pronunciations within the context of something's familiar, a meaningful book that they know. So here's a little bit of a literacy cycle. Starts off with a lesson cycle, just a single lesson. Starts off with some fluency practice, reading a text that they've studied before, so they can focus upon accuracy and expressiveness. Then studying that phonics, that word study, that word sort pattern for the week, and then going into some comprehension activities and expression activities. So whether it's part of a literacy rotation cycle or something else. Now, key resources, what I've repeated throughout the presentation is there's a great resource called Words Their Way, Word Study for Phonics, Vocabulary and Spelling Instruction, highly regarded, by Baer et al. I'll put the reference there. So pause the video and write it down and find the ebook, so it's available as an ebook as well as a physical book. Heaps of information and knowledge contained therein, but also download the slides and you can find that reference subsequently. Other thing I've provided is sources of phonics sequences. If you're curious about, well, what letters do I introduce, in what order, and in what order should I introduce those complex vowels, your AIs, your AYs, your OUs, etc. You've got Words Their Way. Beck and Beck's Making Sense of Phonics is fantastic. You've got the rich open source curriculum or free curriculum from the UK, Letters and Sounds, as well as other materials such as Responding to the Evidence, Synthetic Phonics in a Sequence. That actually also encourages word sorts in a synthetic phonics program. So that's interesting to see that this isn't contrary to a synthetic phonics program. In fact, it's an example of a practical activity within a synthetic phonics activity. Other resources I've just added spelling rules so that if those discussions of, oh, why is that word spelt that way? Actually, it's based on a rule. Why is day D-A-Y as opposed to D-A-I? Well, we don't really end words regularly with the letter I. So the letter A-I makes the long A sound within a word, as in paid, whereas it uses the Y at the end of the word, like day. So those are those practical things. Now, if you want a lot more information about the intricacies of the alphabetic code, I do encourage you to go to the Literacy Bug's more theoretical presentation called The Alphabetic Code. It's on our YouTube channel. It goes into a lot more depth upon the nature of cracking the code, developing your accuracy and fluency so that children are no longer attending to text, but going straight to meaning, as the logic of decoding and spelling has been broken. So, last thing I'll focus upon is monitoring progress. A couple key little templates. One little template makes perfect sense is, okay, I'm a teacher, date, what patterns did we explore? One that I'm really reinforcing here is, okay, I've explored those patterns and those words, but what high frequency words have we also studied? And what further vocabulary have we studied? And were those things found in a source text, like a picture book or something that we read together? And did I provide opportunities for children to write? words with that pattern, high frequency words that they've started in vocabulary, and what are my notes. And another day, same thing. So really trying to emphasize that I love word studies, but they're not done in isolation. They're done in integration with other activities. This is another way of looking, what's the big picture goal that I have for the learners after a series of sequence activities, and did we achieve those goals, and what's going to happen next steps? What are the next steps, etc. Also, I provided a one sheet of, and you can't see this in the video per se, but if you download the PDF, you'll see it, some questions on alphabetic knowledge to monitor children's development. Then going into your letter sound, your phonics knowledge, including mastering your CVC, introducing the silent E pattern, introducing the internal vowel constructs, etc. All set as in questions to say, has the children mastered that yet? What's the date? They've mastered that, they're still working on that, haven't even attempted that, etc. And then moving into now participating in writing. Are they integrating some of that knowledge into their writing? Are they integrating not only that knowledge, but are they attempting through invented spelling to spell more sophisticated words that they have yet to understand the pattern for? So that's another little bit of monitoring that you can do to say, well, where are they on their journey of mastery? But to try to summarize quickly, so what are the areas of growth that we're looking at so far to really harness your word studies? Well, going into it, we're expecting that they have already developed phonological processing or phonemic awareness, or for your emergent stage, that you've got activities that really can reinforce that. Same with the emergent stage, they've got a basic understanding or a strong understanding of their alphabetic knowledge of common letter sound patterns. And then I'll show you a quick one. They're also aware of common onset and rhyme patterns, and there's an assessment called the Z test that you can find in this book, Assessment for Reading Instruction by McKenna and Stahl. So this won't be downloadable, but I do encourage you to look up this book. And the Z test is a really simple test. Basically, the beginning of each word that you're using has something consistent. They all start with the letter Z. So every z, 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 z. What ends is your common, what we call rhyme. This Z is your onset. Your it is your rhyme. So zit, zay, zin, zap, zan, zil, zak. So they're all nonsense words, except for something like zip or zit. So that children have to not only be reading, they're not reading something familiar, they're reading a pattern that is familiar. Zell, they know the word yell, so now that they can read the word zell. So that's that sort of focus. And one thing I will have available for download is something extraordinarily similar. And that's some feature checklists. And so what I mean by feature checklists is one of those checklists. I'll go over here. Is your onset rhyme checklist. So these are all your most common rhymes or endings of single syllable words in English. Ack, ake, an, ain, ale, ale, at, ate, aim. And what you'll find is they're also very predictable. So I can go through and say, well, with B, I have back, bake, ban, bane, bane, bail, bail, bat, bait, etc. Saying, oh, well, these are things that there will be, lots of words we can create off those onsets and rhymes. Now, I don't encourage that as an assessment technique, but you can have little colored little dots and say, well, we've covered that in a word sort, we covered that in a word sort, we covered that, etc. And you can also use those little dots for things like, we've covered these letters in our study. In fact, I put those circles there for a particular reason. One circle might be, does the child know the name of that letter? Can they write the letter? Do they know the sound or sounds that that letter makes? And do they know words that have that letter in them? So it's an early assessment. Name, so maybe sound. Can I write it? Do I know words and can recognize words with that letter in it? Going back to the word sort, you can put colored dots. We've introduced in the within word patterns, the AW vowel construct, the AU construct, and they've sort of mastered that. And other things, these are your prefixes, your common suffixes, and Latin roots, structuring words more complexly. Have we covered those things? Your development of profiles, and your high frequency words. So your first 100 most common high frequency words, your second most common 100 frequency words, and your third your third set of most common high frequency words. So 200 to 300, 100 to 200, 0 to 100. So this is a little bit of an extra resource that maybe we'll explore in much more depth later on. But let me get back to focusing upon growth. Another one is decoding skills. There's a really good book, and it's in my recommended sources of sequence phonics called Making Sense of Phonics. And there's this one really simple assessment little tool in it called Specific Phonics Assessment. And all it really does is it gives you a set of words focusing on that CVC pattern, real words and then nonsense words. And if I fast forward, it just has a series of words based upon different patterns. If I go to here, here's a series of words with your more complex vowel patterns. And so what you would do is start children on assessment A, and if they mastered A, then have them do B, have them do C, have them do D, have them do E, and then if they struggle with E, you know where to teach. You can diagnose, okay, that's a pattern that we need to focus because they haven't yet mastered that decodable pattern. So that's it's a simple one, and to be honest, this is a great book to start out with you sort of if you want to explore phonics. But the big one is with spelling skills. And the reason I say big one is the qualitative spelling inventory is in your words their way. And what's special about the qualitative spelling inventory is it tries to be diagnostic. And if I show an example here, you have a set of words that you're asking children to spell, from simple to more complex. But the scoring sheet actually maps those words between the emergent letter name within words and syllable affix stages. And so if they spell fan correctly, it's like, well, they should be spelling fan correctly if they're in grade 1 because they should have mastered the early stages of the Letter-Name-Alphabetic Stage. But SLED, introducing your consonant vowel, they should also have mastered. However, more complex words like dream or blade or coach or fright, those are introducing patterns that would be more challenging for a grade 1 learner to spell with what I call with mastery. And so it's not only a good test, or it's a good test because it's diagnostic. No, I shouldn't use the word diagnostic, but it allows you to pinpoint what have they mastered and what have they yet to master, and so what should we focus upon. And there's different spelling lists, and if they've mastered one spelling list, you go on to the next. So there's the primary spelling list, and then there's the elementary spelling inventory, and then there's I think the late elementary or more advanced spelling inventory, and then you can create your own inventories once you develop an expertise or sound knowledge of what a progression should look like. And then mastering high frequency words, mastering fluency and comprehension. So I've gone off on a tangent, but you want the kids to be phonemically aware, know their alphabet, know common patterns, being able to decode from simple to more complex words, being able also to be able to spell simple to complex words, recognize high frequency words, and then being able to put all that together to read with fluency, to write with fluency, and to comprehend. And those are our main goals in this whole process. So, to wrap things up really quickly, learning to read is a process of acquiring several types of statistical knowledge that supports rapid and efficient comprehension, and it starts with mastering phonological structure and orthographic structure. So word sorts are a way to develop stronger mastery of orthographic structure. Now, for a beginning reader, every word is unique, but you become expert through practice and practice and practice and study. And the other clear thing to mention is, with that practice, getting a firm understanding of enough words becomes further consolidated by reading those words in context. So moving away from word studies to lots of problem solving in real reading, and being able to, I should be able to read this word because I've studied it before, I've studied this pattern before, and being able to decode in context. That really good, what we call problem solving skills, or another good word for it is word attack. I'm reading it, it's not a word that I know, but I can attack that word with confidence that I can get close or exactly spot on because of the structural knowledge that I've gained over time. So, focus has been on decodable words. I don't want to say anything more there, but you need to have a mixed program. So on that note, without further ado, I want to say a big thank you. Please visit us at theliteracybug.com. If you have any questions, send us an email at info@literacybug.com. Check us out on YouTube. I really encourage you also to follow us on Literacy Bug. We share resources regularly, and this won't be an exception. We'll share this on Twitter and anything else that's related. Downloadable materials. The presentation you've just seen will be able to be downloaded. The cheat sheet that started things out with will be downloaded. Each of those sets of word study cards and lists will be downloadable, as well as the elements checklist, and that's about it. So that's everything you'll need to be able to embark on word studies with your students. But as I said before, check out Words Their Way by Bear et al. Because the vast majority of my knowledge comes from knowing that text very well. Thank you very much.